Awesome. So today we're gonna practice making a couple, actually 3 different entourage. So entourage are just cutouts, often people, but they can be objects and animals as well that you can use in renderings, sections like we just saw, and other sort of landscape graphics. So we're going to do most of our work today in Photoshop. But before we do that, we're going to want to collect 3 different images. So I'm going to open up my file or folder, sorry, so that we see, I don't need this one. So here's my week 4. So we're going to look for I'm going to go well, this one's perfect. Actually, no, this is not perfect. So we want to make our own entourage. I'll use one of my personal photos. Let's see. So we want to find a person. It's easiest for this that we select a person that is kind of like doesn't have a lot of hair that we have to worry about. So this picture here, this person has a hat. So we can kind of just, right? So they have a hat. It'll be pretty easy to take cut out. We'll look for something that has more of like a hard line and more kind of horizontal and vertical line. So maybe, yeah, I'll look up an old, like old car. Volvo, yeah. Sweet. So let's do old. Just because I always imagine myself driving one of these. Perfect. So with Photoshop, it's really important to remember that the quality that you are working on of your images in Photoshop is the quality in which you find them. So I believe there's an old saying, sewage in, sewage out. So you want to try to find the highest quality images you can. So I know my personal image that I selected was a fairly nice photo. It's 6,000 by 4,000, so it's pretty big. And there's going to be enough kind of wiggle room for me to zoom in and zoom out as needed. And I'm noticing with this car image too, down here we can see the pixels. They're a fairly good size. If you're not finding good sizes right away, you can go to Tools if you're using Google, change your size to large. So this kind of filters or sorts by largest image, which is really helpful when you're looking for entourage and whatnot. So this one is looking fairly actually simple. Yeah, nice quality. And then finally, let's see if we're going to get a furry or like feathery animal. So I've been really into blue herons lately. I think that's what, yeah. And I want to be able to cut it out. So this one looks like kind of hairy, and this will be good practice for us. It's a good size. So we'll save this one. Okay. And I found another great source. So there we have Google with the size. Also another great one is let's see. Flickr. So you can also use, yeah, Flickr, and you can if you're like worried about if you want to be published at some point or whatnot, you can kind of change the licensing that you're hoping to have on your image. And there's often really great photos here too. And a lot of photographers will let you download these for free. So this is a great source for images too. But we have our 3 images, and while selecting these images, it's just important that for the sake of this exercise, that your people and objects are not in a white background, and that they are fairly, so let's see if we can go back to the blue heron photo I've selected. It is, let's see. So you want photos sort of where you can see that there's like a blur in the background. That will often help with selecting the object in the foreground. You can have a busier background that's kind of where it's all in focus, but I think you should spend the most amount of your time up front selecting images, because it'll save you a lot of time down the line when you're trying to edit them and clean them up and adjust them. So we want to find for especially the one with the animal with the hair or feathers, a background that we can kind of see that the animal is in focus, the background is not, or maybe the background's just a little bit more simple, and that the animal is separated from the background. Okay, so we have our 3 images. We're going to select them and hit Control while we select them. That allows us to select all 3. And we'll go to Tools, Photoshop, Load Files into Photoshop Layers. What this should do is open up one Photoshop file, and then throw these 3 photos straight into different layers of the Photoshop file.
How did you sort the images by size in your
Yeah,
search?
in Google, when you look up your the subject that you're trying to find, right underneath the search bar is the tools, and then you can sort by size.
And then are we inserting these into an 11 by 17?
Yeah, so you should just open them all up in the in Bridge. We want to select the 3 images, Tools, Photoshop, and load files into Photoshop layers. Once that opens up, we'll find our Photoshop file with our images all loaded in there. And let's see, it's huge right now. So here's our images. Obviously the biggest one is kind of up in front, and then we have our canvas in the back. And this is going off your question. This is not 11 by 17. And so we're going to adjust it right now. And you can adjust it by going in the properties in the corner here. And we want our work to be 17 inches by 11. So all of your photos might be coming in at different sizes. And then before we go ahead and scale these down, what we want to do is want to right click on our images in these layers, and we want to convert them into smart objects. And so what this will allow us to do is kind of to save the original photo while we work. And I'll get into that more in just a second once we scale our images down. So unlike Illustrator, when we scale in Photoshop, we don't have to click anything to keep our scaling uniform. We can just click the control buttons and scale down. And we can, oh, let me get my, see if I can find my keyboard settings quick. Hopefully I can do that. Okay. Okay. That's unfortunate. I don't remember what it's called. Okay. I'm going to stop sharing and pause the recording so I can just find this really quick. So I think it's important that you all can see the keys that I hit. So yeah, hopefully you all can get to that step, have all your image, and I'll be back in just a unfortunately, I can't find that right now. But worst case, I can record it a second time so we can all see the keyboard hotkeys. Okay, so we just scaled this down, and we can zoom in and out by pressing Alt and scrolling with our mouse. And before we get too far into it, let's go back. Hopefully some of y'all downloaded the hotkeys. It's in week 4 on Canvas. I'm gonna bring that and drag it in so that we have our hotkeys for today. Fantastic. Okay, so we're gonna lock. So our hotkeys are here in this layer panel, and we're gonna lock that. So before we get too much into the cutting out of our entourage, I just want to kind of quick talk about the different kind of editing you can do in Photoshop. And really there's 2 different types. There's the destructive and destructive editing. So destructive editing is where you edit things and I guess you can kind of see it as like baking a cake. You're putting in your ingredients and you're instantly baking those ingredients into the cake. And the problem with that is that you're never able to go back and see what ingredients you added in, or isolate certain ingredients from your cake. Then the other method of editing is non-destructive editing. And in that way, you can what you really do is you save the recipe for a cake and you wait till the very end to bake your cake. And so I'm going to show you how to do non-destructive editing, which is the best practice sort of editing. So what I might show you might feel at first a little annoying, or may not be the way you have done it in the past, but we're going to try our best to practice the non-destructive editing because someday in the future it might save you a lot of time when you have to go back and work with your files. And so what we did was when we brought these photos in, is we converted them to smart objects. And I did that by right-clicking on our layer and selecting Convert to Smart Object. And what that does is it kind of saves the original quality of your images. So you can edit things and you'll be able to see what edit kind of filters you've added onto your images, but it also preserves kind of the pixel or the dimensions and the pixel ratios. So you can scale larger and smaller, and you can kind of keep the quality of that original image and size. So a couple essential just hotkeys is the duplicate layer, which is Control J, and that allows you to make copies. And that can be one way of just saving your original photo prior to doing destructive editing. But we'll be doing our non-destructive, so we'll always have access to our original photo. But if you ever need to duplicate your layer, select Control J. And then so I'm going to delete this, and so I can select my layer, go down to this bottom right-hand corner, delete layer. First, before we start, I'm going to turn off everything except for my hotkeys, and then this first image, I'm just going to name it. So our person, we're going to name brush. Our object, we're going to name lasso. And then our animal, we're going to name the file mask. Oops. Control Z. Fantastic. Okay. So first we're going to start with kind of the most rudimentary form of cutting out things from photos. This process can be very tedious depending on how intense your photo is. And so I'll show you some kind of ways to make that happen a lot faster. So in order to use the lasso, we press L, and the lasso tool is a tool that you can use to quickly select things. And it's a lot like the pen tool without the curvature. And so what we're going to do is we're going to just zoom into our object with our lasso tool. And we can just start clicking. And you'll notice that this does straight lines, but you can break those straight lines by pressing Alt and dragging. And if you press space, see, I just made So this, oh, sorry. You can press space and click and drag to move around your canvas without putting down the lasso tool. And so one of the reasons, I'm going to use that Alt and kind of click and drag so I can get around the windshield wipers. One of the reasons that the lasso tool is really annoying is that you could get all the way up to the end of your cutout. And if you make a mistake, you have to redo your cutout. And so I can show you, or actually you can add and subtract to it, but it adds a few extra steps. So as we're going forward, keep selecting. And before I finish it, what I'm going to do, I'm just going to do one wide click and kind of continue going on. And once you get to a good finish point, you double click and that will completely kind of finish off the lasso. And we have our object selected. But you'll see right away that there's some issues that I didn't perfectly cut out these bottom parts. And we can actually add on to our lasso selection. We can do that by pressing the Shift, I believe. Oh, that's the wrong. Control Z. If we press the minus. So Shift adds to the selection, minus, or sorry, an Alt subtracts from the selection. And you'll be able to tell that you have your minus or your plus by when you select Shift or Alt, you'll see the little symbol next to your polygon cursor. So we're going to continue to subtract. A lot of new folks to Photoshop will try to make their work pixel perfect. You do not need to zoom in to be pixel perfect. With this kind of work, don't you just need to have kind of like the squint test, and if the squint test passes, then that's good enough. You don't have to make everything fit perfectly. So we have our car selected, and it's looking pretty good. What we're going to do now is we're going to press the layer mask here. And what that kind of does is cuts out the object you selected and hides the rest of it. And maybe one way to think about it, well, this actually, Photoshop is compared to collage. And so we're kind of going in and cutting out little windows where we can see into the photo behind the window. Some other lasso tricks, other than the Alt and Shift, is that if you press and hold Shift while you're lassoing, you can make your lines orthogonal. And then again, if you press Alt and click and drag, you make your lines a little bit more irregular and organic. So this is good enough for our example here. I'll quick show you how this this mask and how it works for us as far as non-destructive editing goes. So if we right click up here, you can see our mask with our little car silhouette in there. We can actually disable our layer mask and we can see the original photo. So even though we cut out that car, we still have the original photo and the original contents, which makes going back and editing if we need to way easier. And we can just right click on that X there and enable layer mask, and it comes back in. So these next couple ways of cutting out entourage are also working with the layer mask and just kind of manipulating that mask in different ways. So this will be page 1 of your assignment for this week. Once we're done with the lasso, we'll go to our brush image and we'll press B for brush. Make sure you select the layer that you've identified as brush. And what we're going to do is we're going to add a mask to it. So we're going to go down to layer masks and add a mask. So what you'll see is that Photoshop works with layers as masks as white and black. And so what we can do now is Photoshop sees white as the white part of the mask as the image. And so whatever we draw on that's black will make the image disappear. And you can see that being represented in our lasso layer, where the car cutout is a white silhouette and the rest is black. And so now, instead of using the lasso tool to cut out our entourage, we can use the brush. What the strength of the brush is that it's a lot easier to kind of paint in or paint out your entourage, but also the curves are a lot easier. And if you accidentally double click or you accidentally like stop holding your any buttons down or anything like that, it's a lot easier to make up for those mistakes. So we have our entourage image here, and down in the bottom left corner, you'll see the colors that your brush is working with. We want our colors to be perfectly black and perfectly white. You can double check that they are by double clicking the color. Here's our foreground color. There's in every way it's telling us that it's black. If it wasn't, so we can do 1, so now it has 1, it's 1, I guess, % red. And it's changed the hex, it's changed everything about this color. Change it back. It should be completely 0. In the white, which is the background color, should be at 255, otherwise known as the hex number, like 6 or 7 Fs, 6 Fs. So when we're painting with these masks, we can actually jump back and forth between adding a mask and taking away the mask by pressing X. And if you look down at your colors on the bottom left corner, that flips the brush from black to white and white to black, which allows you to remove and add on to your image. So I'm going to use the brush and just quickly erase the big stuff. And if your brush is really small, the trick is that you can click Alt and right click and drag. And you'll see that by clicking Alt and using the right clicking, you can change the diameter of your brush by moving horizontally back and forth. But you can also change the hardness. So the hardness is how much kind of feathering there is on your brush. So let's see, I just lost my origin point. Let's try again. Okay, so what I like to do is have about 95% hardness. That just helps with like a little bit of fade of the entourage. And we want something right now that's just good enough to get the big details gone still. Another trick while we're working on this is that in order to change the opacity of our brushes. So if we wanted something just to fade a little bit, if we press any of the numbers on the top row of our keyboard, that will give that'll change the opacity of our brush in tens. So like 4 is 40, 0 is 100, and 9 is 90. So zoom in, we'll change our brush size as we go. And it's okay if you end up losing parts of the person, because it's honestly really hard to tell once your entourage is in situ, like in the scene, but also because we're working non-destructively, if it's annoying that someone's part of their hat's missing or something, it's really easy just to go back and add it so if we make a mistake like this, we can change it by pressing X, changing the color of our brush, and drawing our image back in. So we're going to go in and just shave off bits of this. Another trick, if you're kind of want to see how much of the person you may be kind of cutting off, you can click on your layer, Control J to duplicate it. And I'm just going to, if you select your mask and press the delete button, they'll be back. And you can change the opacity just enough that you can kind of see if you're missing big parts of the person. So I'm going to click back on my brush layer, make sure that the mask layer is selected. So we're working on the mask layer, not the person layer. Just go in and clean that all up. And it's the little, let's see, it's these like little places where that make a big difference in making your entourage kind of fit into the scene. And so you do want to make sure, even though you're cutting, it's okay to kind of leave out certain parts of the person or cut off a little bit more, like especially where like the fingers are, around the ears, sometimes where the glasses are. Glasses can be a little bit difficult. You want to make sure that you are kind of cutting that all out. So I'm just gonna go in and paint a little bit more back. Another trick with the brush is if you right click, you can see that you can change your types of brushes. And so because we're just drawing in the mask around a person, we will just use our like hard round brush. But what I'll often do is I'll use some of these more rigid, and you can see actually I made a grass brush, but I'll use some more of these rigid brushes to get more of those irregular like plant shapes that I'm trying to cut out so that they feel more organic. So I'm just going to quick finish this up. Okay, I've got most of him there. We can disable our original layer, and I'm just going to delete that because I feel comfortable with what we've got here. It's looking pretty good. And I think this is a good point to just show some of the more of the strengths of using that smart filter. So when we're editing, if we're editing in Photoshop and we want to edit the actual photo, we have to select the actual photo here. We can go up to Image, Adjustments, and you can see that there's all these different photo adjustments that we can apply to our photo. And so if we needed, this is my friend Viknesh, if we needed Viknesh to be a little bit brighter, Often it helps for blending things if you just remove a little bit of the contrast. And I apply that, you'll see here that we have a smart filter brightness and contrast setting here that we can actually toggle on and off. And so this allows us to like go back to the original photo or go in and edit any of the settings that we had adjusted. And so let's see if we click this here or double click it, we can kind of change how intense our settings were, and we can also go back and change the actual settings themselves. So again, this is one of the strengths of that smart filter. And to kind of get an idea of how masks work, we can just disable that layer mask and let's just toggle that smart filter on and off. You can see that the whole image is being edited, but again, we're just looking through our mask, and so we're only seeing the person being changed. Okay. So for our last exercise, we're just going to select our hairy or furry animal. Let's see, I should have written this one down, the V for move tool. We can scale this up. And we're going to select Control Alt R. And what Control Alt R does is it selects and masks. And this is a tool that I've found extremely helpful in getting those really fine details, selecting them really quick, and saving me a lot of time with the lasso tool or the brush tool. So on the properties settings, or in the properties window, you can see there's a few different ways we can view our image. I find onion skin is sometimes nice, but one of my favorite ones I think is the overlay. This will allow you to see your edges or your original of your image. So right now everything's red because we're seeing all of it. But if we click here, select subject, Photoshop will try and select as much of your subject of your photo as it possibly can, and usually it does a pretty good job. And this is one of the reasons I suggested you try to find an image with kind of a blurry background and a nice foreground, or a background and foreground that are very, there's a lot of contrast or they're very distinct. Because right away we can see that the heron has been pretty well selected, and we will not have to do too much work on these kind of feathers sticking out from it. So what we can do if we want to kind of refine this image is to the left here, there's the refine edge brush tool. We can go in and just kind of go around the outside of our organism, and you can see the plus. It's the same setting or same hotkeys as we were working with the brush or the lasso. Alt is minus, and then Shift goes back to plus. And we're adding to the selection that we're cutting out. So we're on the plus, and this is working really well. It's just collecting those around the feathers and separating the background really well. But I'm noticing down here that there's a little bit of the heron missing. So I'll press Alt, I'll see if it can refine that edge. It doesn't seem to want to. So that's one of the problems with using this tool, is that it's the you're working with the computer and the machine, and it can't always see things. So we can go back to our quick selection tool, press and add our parts of our heron back in. And we can Alt scroll to move around still. Press Shift to toggle between adding and subtracting. All right, and that's probably too zoomed in. I can start to see the pixels. Awesome. And then if you really want to make sure you have this figured, like all the hair looking nice, there's this button here, the refine hair button. Sometimes this can undo your work, but it often helps fix things and makes your image a little bit more crisp. So I can undo that. If we watch down here, I'll Control C, refine hair, and it's given us that those like strokes that you see in hair. For further refinement, sometimes you get kind of like a halo around your image. You can edit them on the right side here in this window. So the smooth tool kind of smooths out the details of the cutout. The feather kind of gives you a softer edge. Contrast is nice sometimes when you're working with something that has a lot of hair that you need to isolate. But I think the tool that's the most helpful is the shift edge. So all that does is it shifts the edge of the selection in or out. And so when you have like a little bit of a halo around something, you can just shift it a little bit inward. And that'll just help make it look nice and crisp. Okay. So we're going to press OK. And now you can see everything's been selected. We're just going to go and hit the layer mask. And now this is looking pretty good. Let's see. Yeah, and I think so I think this is looking great. If we needed to edit this even more, we can go back and we can use the lasso tool if there's giant chunks we need to cut out. We can use the brush tool because this is a mask and draw in and out things. And I believe if we double click this, double click the mask, you can go back and see, or go back to this mask editing window. So this is another reason that this is kind of nice. We can use the contrast to you can see that this shows that there's a low opacity part of the image still coming through. And I want that gone so my image can be nice and clean. So I'm going to increase the contrast a bit. I think that might work. There we go. A lot more crisp. And there's definitely a lot of more fine tuning I could do. But if this is just a little heron, in the background of an image, this would be perfect. So what some folks do is, so Control S for saving. And what some folks will actually do is they'll save their entourage as only Photoshop files in an attempt to preserve the quality of their entourage, but also can help just like if that heron, if I needed to adjust that heron at all, I have that original photo in my Photoshop file. But we're going to save this same as we save our other things. And I should also add, if we were completely sure that we did not want to have that original original image, I'm going to just do a Control J so I can have my original. We can right click on our mask and say apply layer mask. And now our image is just the image itself. So it's kind of baked all of our work that we've done. And so this is kind of where I'm talking about the image recipe and the kind of baking of the cake. We can do the same with, so I press Control J to duplicate our friend Viknesh here. So just to add a little bit more and show you some other things you can do, let's go to hue and saturation. This is nice if someone's in a sunset and you need to like kind of adjust colors a little bit. but we'll make it a little bit extreme just so we can see. Okay. Maybe Vignesh was at a disco or something and got his photo taken. So again, in the smart filter, you can see our hue and saturation change there, our brightness and contrast, and we can go in, let's see, rasterize layer, oops, and then apply layer mask, and it's kind of baked our image. So now it's just that photo. Finally, when it's time to export things, so we have our final image here, we can go File, Export, Export As. And what I should have done was take our weak hotkeys out. Okay, let's go again. Export as. Because we're exporting as a JPEG, it's giving us a white background, but we want it to be transparent. So we're going to click on Format, PNG. And now you can see with that checkered background, there's some transparency involved. And we can just export each of them for our assignment. And let's just, gosh. And that is how to create Entourage. Are there any questions?